Over the weekend, Lovable partnered with OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic for a challenge to see which model gives the best results. So I took the opportunity to test these models with an application that I've been building lately. The application that I'm showing now is a linear referencing app I built using Lovable during the last few months. Linear referencing is a robust and well-established methodology to manage linear data in industries such as roads, water, and wastewater. Basically, the system uses a common referencing measure, such as milestones, to manage multiple layers of attributes that share the same referencing system. If you've ever seen these milestones, mileposts along the road, that's what I'm talking about. It is a language that works great both in the field and for IT systems. This application allows you to upload an Excel file with the roads-based network and linear attributes, which I already did, and then has three main sections. The visual segment editor, where in edit mode, I can resize existing segments, I can create new segments, I can update the values for those sections, I can change those values and resize segments again. The second section is the tabular view, where I can update the same information using a tabular view. And then I have the attribute types control panel, where I can create or update existing attribute types. And these will then be available here in the network data tab to create or updating linear attributes. Now, the visual editor can be quite tricky. When working with the linear referencing system, the most important part is data integrity. You want to make sure that as your base network updates, your segments don't overlap, that there are no gaps or invalid ranges of kilometers. And that's where I added a number of UX elements, such as, once again, entering edit mode, snapping to junctions and interchanges, snapping to other segments within the same attribute type, auto creating segments for gaps. So if I'm missing some information over here, I can enter my criticality layer and auto create segments to complete this gap. And also the ability to zoom in and move around my network data to precisely locate segments and be able to update them. Getting the visual editor to work correctly so that all components cohesively work within the same coordinate system was quite a challenge, and specifically, you can see that getting the snapping to work smoothly was and still is a bit of a challenge, and that's where I decided to test these three models. The goal was to build an LRS system, a linear referencing system with the main components: a tabular editor, visual editor, Excel import and export functionality, as well as validations. The rules of engagement. I started with the exact same prompt for all three different engines, 2 pages long, which is quite a challenge for these models. I allowed exactly 15 short follow-up prompts to fix and enhance, focusing on one certain functionality. No chatting at all, even though the chat mode in Lovable is awesome and amazing. No rolling back to previous versions, even though this functionality is great as well. No, please make 100% sure no existing functionality is lost, which I always use. And one last note, Lovable's try to fix button does not count as one of the 15 prompts. In the end, I added one more bonus round, which is especially challenging always, a UX prompt. Make the experience feel alive and dynamic, but not overwhelming. Think delightful micro interactions and engaging colors, including a dark mode. I'll jump immediately to the results before I actually show you the solutions. So all three models were very similar in capability. They all worked pretty well, which was amazing to see. They did take different approaches to start with, but they eventually got to a similar point. However, if I need to choose one, then Google was the first place, and then OpenAI and Anthropic. And I'll jump right ahead and show you the different solutions. What I'm showing here is the solution that I received with Google. we've got all the basic elements. We've got the visual editor over here. We've got the linear attribute table over here. I can make edits in both sections. And I also have the attribute type control panel over here. I loved how I got this user experience and user interface with one prompt, very compact, very neat. However, the reason I chose Google is because of the visual segment editor. I really loved how it allows me to zoom in and out using my mouse wheel scroll, and then I can pan around using this nice slider over here. If I zoom back out again, and then I really liked the way I can resize existing segments using these handles. No other solution was as smooth, as slick as this solution over here. Another reason I chose Google for the first place was because during the process, I felt confidence in the prompting process. Sometimes it felt like Google was too careful in taking my prompts too literally with the minimal interpretation, but eventually that ended up pretty well. And that gave Google the first place. I do want to point out some nice elements that the other engines offered, and I'll start with OpenAI. I liked this little touch here of those milestones markers, okay? And I also liked how it added an exportable Excel template button over here to jumpstart a user on creating data. And if I move on to Anthropic, there were two things I liked over here. First, it's the way it handled the resizing of adjacent segments, which is pretty tricky. And you can see that as I hover over the different segments, there's this dark band, which indicates that right now, if I'm going to click my button, it will resize the medium segment. Okay. And if I click the button now, it will resize the high red segment, which is pretty nice. And I also liked the inline editing capability, the user interface for inline editing that you click, which when you click makes it editable. I thought that was pretty good. Choosing between OpenAI and Anthropic for the second place was not straightforward. At one point, I thought OpenAI would not be able to get the visual editor right when I had to repeat my prompt 3 times before it actually got it right. And that is scary because the one thing you don't want to get into with these models is an endless cycles of prompts that don't get you anywhere. However, eventually it was successful, and I did choose OpenAI for the second place because it was considerably faster than any of the other two. Finally, as I mentioned, I asked all models to be creative, and that is especially challenging yet for these models. And I can basically say that Google and OpenAPI were extremely conservative to the point that I could barely see any visible changes. I do want to point out Anthropic for at least trying, even if the result was sometimes a bit kind of funny. So if I jump to Anthropic and move to that version with the micro interactions in dark mode, you can see the dark mode here, which is nice, not great, but okay. And you can see that when I hover over the segment, it kind of jumps around, and you can see this neon halo, which is kind of funny. However, at least it tried. I actually liked more what Claude did with my original application over here. So if I move to here, yep, you can see how these icons kind of stand out, the button stands out, and the icon moves around. And these highlights over here, and same here. When I hover over the button, it jumps out, and the icons play around. I actually thought that was more to the point, and Quite good. So that is it.